Shalom. Shalom. Giving honor and praise to the Creator, the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael, also known as Kashub the Danite. This is a presentation being brought to you, brothers and sisters, and a matter regarding slavery, as you may see. And we know and understand that it's a very controversial, a very sensitive, a very delicate, and a very deep subject. So in this particular aspect, brothers and sisters, and in this particular teaching, what will happen, what we will do is deal with it very meticulously, scholarly, maturely, professionally, and humbly, brothers and sisters. Okay? So let us begin in prayer. Hallelujah. Moshienu, Melech HaOlam, Elohe Abraham, Elohe Yitzchak, Elohe Yisrael, Ha'el HaGibor, Ha'el HaNorah, Ha'el HaGomer, Ha'el HaGoreim, Atahahu, Wa'en Kimoka, Atahu, Wa'en Shawelaka, Ein Kimoka, Ein Eslaka, Bashamayim or Ba'aretz, Ani Kore Eleaka, Elohai, Lihiyot Imrefi, Wagam Kain, Bebakwasha, Lena Helna, Et Makshabotai, Lihiyot Debareka, Walo Debarai, Shu Bebakwasha, Et Zikron, Sipurnu, La Amka Yisrael, Hayot Im Odka, Ubne Yisrael, Ashahem Baburut, Alecha. Hallelujah. Amen. Let us begin, brothers and sisters, in this particular aspect and in this particular teaching. Okay? We're going to start by looking at this here. The matter of slavery. Were there black people captured from the continent of Africa and shipped to the Americas in chains and unsanitary ships? Let us go on in this particular aspect. Next slide. Thank you. Shalom. This is presented in love and respect. Shalom. Giving honor and praise to the Most High. This is presented in love and respect in honor of our people who are deemed by the byword black in regards to whether or not such a thing as the Atlantic slave trade did occur. Many scholars, such as Ishaka Musa Barashango, Ivan Sertima, and Hugh Thomas, all three who are now deceased, spoke of the Atlantic slave trade in great detail in their writings. You can look this up in their works online. There are some, however, who say that there was no Atlantic slave trade and that we black people, quote unquote, are the Indians that are indigenous to the Americas. And we want to sit there, brothers and sisters, and have that to be noted as to why such a presentation as this is presented in the first place. You understand? And throughout the presentation, I will state periodically the reason, because this will become, to some, controversial, some debatable, some influential, and some who may not even care. But what we're going to do in this particular aspect, brothers and sisters, is continue on in this particular teaching. Let us go. The matter of Columbus. One thing we want to set the record straight on is that Christopher Columbus never went to the land north of the Florida Keys. He landed only in lands currently called San Salvador, Bahamas, Jamaica, Hispaniola, as well as places in current Central America and South America. Columbus, according to many scholars, set sail the same week the Moors were ousted from Spain by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand in 1492. He also, according to William Katz in his book, Black Indians, captured natives and shipped them to Spain to be treated as slaves. Columbus died in 1506. Okay, so this is something, brothers and sisters, we want to point out for evidence purpose. And if you begin to look and see, you'll begin to see brothers and sisters sources cited already, such as William Catt's book. I mentioned in the previous slide about Ivan Sertima. So we already see that we're not coming, brothers and sisters, with the aspect of a meme. We're not coming with the aspect of just, not to be disrespectful, one person's video, and we're just supposed to sit there like, everything you said is right. No. There are people who may listen to even myself teach and say they disagree with this or they disagree with that. You understand? But if you notice, brothers and sisters, in the teaching, I don't sit there, and not that I'm perfect, I don't sit there and drop F-bombs if somebody disagrees with me. I don't sit there and get disrespectful or insulting or make you feel less if you disagree with what a brother is being made to do by the Spirit. And when I say made to do by the Spirit is this: there's no way that you are going to sit there and state that the people were taken from the West going east and not speak about those who went from the east and take it to the West. All right, we are going to cite all kinds of scholars, black ones, white ones, and so forth and so on, male ones, female ones, about accounts that they have sat there and spoke of. Let us go on, brothers and sisters. The matter of Columbus, part 2. Christopher Columbus, prior to his death, having had made 4 trips, one in 1492, 1493, 1498, and 1502, is known according to many historians as a murderer and a plunderer of one's wealth, and many natives' limbs cut off if they did not have a certain quota filled of gold. Now, when you go, brothers and sisters, into the Native American Museum that's located in downtown Manhattan, that's where I got that information from about their limbs being cut off if they didn't sit there and have a certain quota of gold. Essentially, he was a crook, born in Italy, worked for the Spaniards, and plundered the natives. Whether he knew he was not in the East or not is not the focus of this presentation. However, we want to explain more regarding European sailors, explorers, and exploiters. So let's go on, brothers and sisters. Amerigo Vespucci, a man born in Italy and who sailed to Brazil after it was quote-unquote discovered by Pedro Cabral in the year 1500. He it was that America is named after by a map maker named Wester Muller in the 16th century CE. Now, we say CE meaning a common era as opposed to AD, all right? So when you see CE, for some, they refer to it as AD, all right? Amerigo Vespucci died in 1512. So one of the things we want to point out, brothers and sisters, in regards to this is that who they refer to as Pedro Cabral, who is said to have, quote unquote, discovered Brazil in the year 1500, for the Europeans, he did discover it. So even when people say, understandably, that Christopher Columbus didn't discover America, I, as a person who loves history and understanding linguistics and so forth, and understanding one's culture and reasoning for saying something, will say that yes, Columbus did discover America for the European. He didn't discover it for the people who already sailed here from Africa. He didn't discover it for the people already sailed here from, and I'm going to go there, the era of King Solomon. You understand? The Phoenician people have artifacts that was found over here in the Western Hemisphere. So these are things that we're not just coming off the top of our head. You understand? So yes, brothers and sisters, they did discover, but they discovered it for a particular purpose, for their own people, for their own imperialistic ideas. So let's move on. Understand the reason why somebody is saying something. Amerigo Vespucci, part 2. Since the men were worn out from having been nearly a sea at year, and the ships becoming dangerously unseaworthy, the crew cried out that they wished to return to Castile. Castile is in Spain. Therefore, we agreed to seize shiploads of the inhabitants as slaves and to load the ships with them and turn towards Spain. The people were without clothing, timid and ignorant, and we did whatever we wished to them. Now, What I just cited came from Amerigo Vespucci, Pilot Major. That is an article that's written by Frederick J. Poole. So I'm citing the sources in which I'm getting my information from. And right there, it cannot be denied from a source that there were ships taking natives to Castile, which is in Spain, going from what we call the Western Hemisphere of today, going, brothers and sisters, east. All right, let's go on in this particular teaching. Vasco de Gama. He was a Portuguese sailor who went to India by way of sea. Born in 1460, he died in 1524. He essentially helped Portugal have imperialism in the world by going to India in the late 1490s. All right, so this is something, again, brothers and sisters, that we want to point out for edification purposes and reasoning. All right, let's go on. Next slide. Henry Hudson. He was an explorer for the English. In 1609, he sails in the area between New York and New Jersey, today called the Hudson River. New York was named such in 1664 by the permission of Charles II of England in honor of his brother, Duke of York. New Jersey was named such in the 17th century CE by James, Duke of York, and later passed down to John Berkeley and George Carteret. So these names, brothers and sisters, in your own time, you can look up state of New Jersey history in John Berkeley, and you'll begin to see the information in this particular aspect. Let's go on, brothers and sisters, if you will, to the next slide. Francisco Pizarro. He was born in Spain and worked for Spain. He led an expedition that was against the people of the Inca people. The Inca people lived in Peru. Pizarro was killed in 1541 by his own company. All right, so Francisco Pizarro, as stated, is a person that was killed, brothers and sisters, within what you call the 16th century CE. And he was the one that led the expedition against the people in Peru that was known as the Inca. All right, so we want to go on for the next aspect in the next slide. Sir Francis Drake. He was born in the 1540s and passed away in 1596. He was an Englishman who was noted as a sea captain and a slave trader. This gets into the subject matter of the presentation that we want to share for edification purposes. All right, so brothers and sisters, what we're going to do from this point on, after we already explained a list from England, Portugal, Spain, and even Italy, because Christopher Columbus was truly an Italian, all right, about different European nations led by one man, be it Christopher Columbus, Pizarro, Vasco de Gama, Amerigo Vespucci, Sir Francis Drake, and so forth and so on. We're going to sit there now, go into the crux of this presentation. Thus is the intro. Next slide. The matter of the slave trade. Balboa in 1513 had 30 blacks with him when he discovered what is now the Pacific Ocean. Cortez, when he went to conquer what is now Mexico, he had 300 blacks with him. Alvarado in the 16th century, when he went to Ecuador, had blacks with him. Blacks, since the time of Henry the Navigator, which dates to the 15th century CE, had been shipped to Portugal and to Spain as slaves. All right, so we want to sit there and point this out for reason and purposes. Now, what a person can do, brothers and sisters, is look up Balboa in 1513, look up Alvarado in the 1500s, and begin to see if you can sit there and cross-reference and check the information out for the validity of such. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter of the slave trade, part 2. Vasquez alone in 1526 brought black people as slaves to what is now the Carolinas. The matter of 1619 is that they were brought from Brazil, black shipped to Brazil as slaves since 1538 by the Dutch. Dutch and Portugal fought over the control of Brazil in the 16th century into the 17th century. George Yardley and others had blacks as slaves in what is now Virginia and other places before the era of Anthony Johnson. This matter was discussed on a video and will be placed in the description of this video. So this is something we want to point out. Now, when this video is uploaded, you will begin to see, brothers and sisters, that there will be description within it discussing a particular aspect of what we're talking about. This presentation, brothers and sisters, was put together essentially in what you call the month of February. February is what they call Black History Month. All right. So, in light of that, I thought it was a good idea to sit there and put this PowerPoint together. I tried to get this out online before such, but it didn't go down like that. So therefore, it's coming out today on this aspect on YouTube. Now, I want to explain something in this regard. And it says the matter of 1619 is that they were brought from Brazil by the Dutch. So when you read, as we get into later, about John Wolfe and the Dutchman of War aspect, that those people that were brought there were already enslaved in what you call South America. All right. Dutch and Portugal fought over the control of Brazil in the 16th and into the 17th century. Let's go on. George Yardley and others had blacks as slaves in what is now Virginia and other places before the era of Anthony Johnson. Remember this for the future presentation on future PowerPoint in this. The matter of Alexander Falconbridge. He was a doctor on the slave ships. And this is what he stated in his records dating back to the 18th century CE. So as we stated, we citing our sources. He made the most of his room in stowing the slaves and wedging them in. They had not so much room as a man in his coffin. He took his shoes off so as to not crush the slaves, as he was forced to crawl over them, the slaves leaving marks on him from biting and pinching him. Now, Alexander Falconbridge, you can look this up in your own time, and that is a European, a white man, okay, for reason and purposes, that actually spoke of the slave trade himself, and as him being what they consider a doctor or a surgeon on this particular aspect in his account and his record concerning this. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter of Alexander Falconbridge, part 2. He states the following. Many among the slaves who quarreled was due to the fact that they were relieving themselves, that is to say, moving their bowels or so forth, trying to, when able to, walk to the latrines. Since many were shackled together, it made for a quarrel between them. Then he goes on to say, a woman on the slave ship Emilia was chained to the deck and was deemed insane, then sold into Jamaica. Men who were insane were often flogged to death. So what can cause insanity is several things, such as in this case, being separated from the land that you knew, being separated from your family, being separated from your loved ones, and so forth. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Now, I want to make a disclaimer. This is not to say, brothers and sisters, that prior to the Atlantic slave trade, that slavery did not exist. That's not saying that. This is not saying prior to the Atlantic slave trade that there were no white people who enslaved white people, that there were no black people that enslaved black people. However, we want to stay in focus with this kind of presentation because I realize in discussing this kind of matter, as sensitive as the subject is, people who may disagree with the presentation try to deflect it. Well, what about the black and black? That's not what we're talking about. That's why if you look at the title, it says a teaching regarding slavery and the slave trade. I didn't say nothing about black or white. But I noticed when I did a presentation when I was in City College about this, and they seeing me as what they consider to be a black man, it was like, oh, well, the Irish were enslaved, and no, who said anything about black or white? Because you know what you did. It's called that guilt and that conscience that come up in your subconscious that makes you say and feel the way that you feel. But the truth is going to come out regardless. You understand? So let's go on in this particular aspect. All right. Next slide. The reason for citing Falconbridge. The point in citing Falconbridge was due to the fact that many stated that black historians are they who promote the idea that blacks were taken from Western Africa and brought to the Americas in chains in unsanitary ships. Yet, we see an account from a white person who said nothing to support that the Atlantic slave trade did not happen. Let us take a look at a film made by Hollywood, however, is important regarding the subject matter of whether the slave trade existed. Shalom. So the point I want to state in this, as far as me citing Falconbridge, is because there are many who are saying, well, we was already here in the Americas and we are the indigenous people of this country here that's currently called the United States. So there's no way that we could have came over here from the East. And the only ones that's actually teaching that is these black historians. So what I did was I cited a white person in history just for edification purposes. Okay, let's go on, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. Let's go. Now, the matter of the Amistad and court. Now, what you're looking at here on the left-hand side, it says transatlantic slave trade hoax, right? Then it says African Americans ain't African.org. So they're saying that what we just spoke of, brothers and sisters, earlier, when it says here, many among the slaves who were called was due to the fact that they were relieving themselves. And we speak about the aspect of a woman on a slave ship named Emilia, that was the name of the ship, was chained to the deck and was deemed insane. So they're saying apparently in this meme here on the side, remember, we here not coming with memes, all right? So they're saying in this particular meme right here that that's false. I don't know why they say such, but what we want to do is show an aspect for edification purposes. Let's go.
Thank you, sir. Please see. Mr. Hollywood?
It's quite a tale. Intrigue, abduction, courage in the face of unspeakable suffering, and all true. All right. Now tell me if this is true. Certain tribes in Africa for hundreds of years, thousands perhaps, have owned slaves. Translate.
Tekenya botulona uyatahu nahi tukroa wakbo hadwanga hulatonyale.
Oh.
Yes.
And under what circumstances might one become a slave, say among the Mende of which you claim to belong? Translate.
Boawe tawuti andu omende bla lotiya. Koi. May. Was. Debts.
Oh, I see. And how many men are indebted to you?
I don't think you do see.
Excuse me?
Your Honor, Mr. Hollywood is
Who's
trying
asking
to
you
do this.
No, the Mende word for slave is closer in meaning to worker than what you're trying
Do
to
these
say.
workers own the land they work on? Do they receive wages? Are these workers free to not work for you if they so choose?
Your Honor, he's questioning the translator.
No, the translator is answering for the witness.
No, the witness isn't being given a
Mr. Baldwin.
given a
All right,
chance to
fine,
answer.
Mr. Baldwin. Slavery, indentured servitude, whatever they want to call it. I don't mind. The concept is the same. Now, he is familiar with the concept. After all, when you come down to it, I mean, it's all about money, isn't it? It's slaves, production, money. I mean, that's the idea of it, whether it's here or there. I'm confused. Do your people routinely slaughter their slaves in the manner that you just so vividly described to us? Of course they don't. What would be the point of that? I mean, killing your own slaves is rather like burning down your own house or hut, isn't it? How do you explain that paradox?
I don't understand what you mean.
Sure you do. As does everyone here. The behavior you attribute to your tormentors, your victims, to be more precise, and therefore every other aspect of your testimony makes no sense. Not even to you. But thank you for it. Like all good works of fiction, it was entertaining. Nothing more.
Nahumbi. BCA.
Brothers and sisters, I wanted to sit there and state this. Now, what you just heard came from the movie that was made back in the 1990s, all right, called Amistad. It was made by Steven Spielberg. Now, let's take note on what we heard. The guy who was the lawyer or the attorney against the people who are black, right, stated what? All good works of fiction. It was entertaining. Now, when we dealing, brothers and sisters, with they, even today, regardless of their color, who say that the Atlantic slave trade did not happen going, basically saying going west, but rather it only went east, and saying that there's no way to prove that the Atlantic slave trade was going from Africa to the Americas. They're saying that that's a hoax. If you look right here, transatlantic slave trade hoax. African Americans ain't African.org. So whoever created this kind of meme may perhaps have the same spirit as the person who even a Hollywood movie show about the aspect of that slave trade being entertaining or a work of fiction. So we have to begin to perhaps look at the mentality of one who can sit there and say such a thing. The point, brothers and sisters, is that there is no way, shape, form, or fashion that one can actually try to say that that is a work of fiction when we already, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes, already show evidence of that to the contrary. So, brothers and sisters, the point in this, showing the aspect of what happened and stating in that movie Amistad about the lawyer who was against the people from Africa, he stated what? Thank you for that. But like all good works of fiction, entertaining. So apparently, whoever made this meme must think that that is a work of fiction as well, because they're saying that transatlantic slave trade hoax. That was the point in me showing this for edification purposes. Let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. All right. The matter of the Asiento. After watching thousands of Indians dying, others burnt alive, Las Casas returned to Spain, determined to save the surviving. Las Casas made a plea to Charles V of Spain to not enslave the Indians, but rather the Negroes from out of Africa can be brought. They said the Indians were worthless as slaves and the Negroes extremely useful. Charles V made then what became known as the Asiento, a legal, though wicked document used to carry blacks as slaves to places 4,000 a year, known today as Haiti, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and Cuba. All at the time was under the control of the Spanish crown. All right. So what we're going into in this particular regard is saying that the Spanish crown, brothers and sisters, is basically talking about the people from Spain that have control over the areas that's today called Haiti, all right? That's today called Puerto Rico, that's today called Jamaica, and that's today called Cuba, all right? So this is what we want to point out for edification purposes. And in your own time, you can look up the aspect of what happened and showing from Charles V and the Asiento and the aspect of Bartolome Las Casas. We're citing our sources. We're not coming, and I say this in no disrespect, with a meme. You see this right here on the left-hand side? There is, besides the website, where is your information in citation? All right? So African Americans ain't African. So maybe the people like that are black, the Negros in Mexico or Mexico, or the Morenos that dwell in the land that you call Puerto Rico, in the southern part of Puerto Rico, where they're blue, black, and break homes and use picks and all kinds of stuff, like the black man in Brooklyn does, maybe they don't count to them. So somebody asks, where else where the slaves have come from? I'm not sure. You understand? But the point in this particular aspect and presentation is that just as the European man in that movie, Amistad stated that's a work of fiction. So apparently is the same spirit of whoever made this particular meme and that organization. We're going to go on to the next slide. The Asiento and Las Casas, the hypocrite. As early as 1540, 10,000 Negroes were being imported into the West Indies. By the end of the 16th century, a set amount of 900,000 had been shipped to the West Indies alone, not counting those sent to Mexico and South America. He, Las Casas, saw that the Indians were not left in peace, but were exterminated so the space can be used to enslave Negroes. All right, so when you read about Bartolome Las Casas and the aspect of what happened, brothers and sisters, in the 16th century CE, and King Charles V of Spain, and what happened with the Asiento, and so forth and so on, you will begin to see, know, and understand what this is talking about in regards to the slave trade going to what we call the West Indies, which, if you're saying African Americans ain't African, what about the black people that were shipped to the West Indies? Do they count? Do they mean anything? Let's go on, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. The Asiento and the college reference matter. Spanish colonists confronted an acute need to have laborers/slaves. Using the Asiento, both Spain and Portugal, both countries, traded in blacks as slaves in Spanish America. Portugal, using the ship Buen Jesus, had blacks brought from Angola to Veracruz in 1596. Between 1601 and 1640, up to 70,000 blacks as slaves were brought to Veracruz. Charles IV of Spain, Philip IV of Spain, was told that there were 80,000 blacks as slaves in Mexico. So this is something we want to sit there and point out for edification purposes. All right? Let's go on, if we will, brothers and sisters, for reason and purposes, all right? It says here, brothers and sisters, Spanish colonists confronted an acute need to have laborers/slaves. Using the Asiento, now the point in citing that part is because the Asiento was made by Charles V of Spain by the suggestion of Bartolome Las Casas, all right? Using the Asiento, both Spain and Portugal, both countries traded in blacks as slaves in Spanish America. Well, what you're looking at, brothers and sisters, in this particular on map right here showing the Western Hemisphere, the colored part in the tan, that's where Spanish America was. Throughout was called South America, throughout was called Central America, and a great part of what's now called the United States. All right? So when you had the situation that happened in 1803 and then 1804, in which the aspect when Thomas Jefferson got land going west, and then you later on in 1848, when they had the Spanish-American War, in which they acquired Texas and so forth and so on, the United States under the English, that's to say the descendants of the British, wound up having more land in what we call the United States. Prior to that, however, is what this map here is showing. All right? The way a brother teaches, one must cite sources. One must cite reasoning, and one must be able to use a pen and pad. All right? So this is what we want to get into for reasoning purposes, brothers and sisters. Now, looking at the map there that they show of North America carefully, right? You will begin to see that Florida, which is a Spanish word, by the way, is there. Florida was owned by the Spanish. All right. And we're going to sit there and touch upon that in this particular aspect. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. The matter of the Portuguese in part. Portugal chose New York to continue the trade of blacks as slaves for the Cuban market. A ship named the Advance left New York in 1852 for Africa for blacks as slaves. In 1848, a steamship was used in the Brazilian slave trade by Thomas da Costa Ramos, had a ship Teresa from Angola with over 1,000 blacks as slaves in a cramped space. So the point, brothers and sisters, is this. If you can look up these years, these names, these places, and see where a brother gets the information from, all right? So this is something we want to sit there and point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. Let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. The matter with John Hawkins in part. John Hawkins was an English slaver, that is to say a trader in slaves, who was supported by the Queen of England in voyages. He made 3 voyages, 1562, 1564, and 1567. He recaptured blacks as slaves from the Portuguese ship Lancados, as well as from the Cachio River in Guinea. Now, if I mispronounce something, I apologize. John Hawkins, as well as Sir Francis Drake, in the 16th century, went into Africa to get captives and to bring blacks as slaves to Venezuela and other places. What is the point in going into that? John Hawkins didn't bring, correct me if I'm wrong, black people as slaves to what you call currently North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, but he brought them to places such as Mexico, such as Venezuela. Venezuela, brothers and sisters, is in South America. There are thousands of people of color within that particular country. So when we are reading, as some may say, African Americans ain't African, as if to say that the slave trade could have never or would have never went west. What about the people that's spoken of in Venezuela? We got to sit there and give an account for that. We got to give an account for the black people in today's Dominican Republic. We got to give an account for the Morenos or the Negros in the country called Mexico or Mexico. There are hundreds of black people, like my complexion and darker, in what you call current day Puerto Rico in the southern part of the island. So we have to give brothers and sisters an account of how that particular thing happened if we care to. And in the West Indies and in Spanish America, if you will, in Central America, correct me if I'm wrong, they don't do what some black people in North America, United States is doing. Oh, the slave trade never happened. They teach their children about that history. Correct me if I'm wrong. You understand? That is born of a concept of the black American Negro because for whatever their own reasoning is. All right? So let's go on, if we will. You can look these up in references. All right? Next slide. The matter of the Moors. In the year 1492, the Moors were kicked out of Spain, though they were there in Spain as late as 1610. In the year 1591, they assisted in capturing blacks as slaves and having them blacks shipped to places in the West Indies. The term Moor has been said to mean 1, navigator, 2, black, from the term more, meaning black. All right, so this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Interesting, because when you look up the word Moor inside of a Hebrew dictionary, it will tell you the word menahel oneya, which means a driver of a ship. So it's a navigator. All right, so this is just something we want to point out in that particular regard. Next slide. Other matters regarding slavery and the black man. As a result of the sugar factories, there are so many Negroes in the island of Hispaniola that it resembles Ethiopia itself. That was said by a guy named Gonzalo Oviedo in the 16th century. Here, the chief urgency is Negroes. We pray license for each citizen to bring over male and female slaves free for all duty. Attorneys of the city of Santiago in Cuba. All right, so looking at this PowerPoint right here very carefully, right? It says, as a result of the sugar factories, there are so many Negroes in the island of Hispaniola that it resembles Ethiopia itself. Brothers and sisters, Ethiopia, we know, is a Greek term from Ethne and Ops, which means burnt face. So Hispaniola, which today is known as Dominican Republic, and Haiti, right? It is said in the 16th century to have so many black people there that it resembles Ethiopia itself. Gonzalo Oviedo is the one who said that. Now, here's another statement. This is made by the attorneys of the cities of Santiago and Cuba. Here, the chief urgency is Negroes. We pray license for each citizen to bring over male and female slaves free for all duty. These citations come from a book written by a guy named Eric Williams. I'm going to type that into the chat. Eric Williams, all right? He was the prime minister of Trinidad and Tobago in the 1970s. We're not playing games, brothers and sisters, as far as our citations are concerning. We're not joking around. This is not an LOL matter. This is not something that somebody takes the time out their hands because they ain't got nothing else to do. We're presenting our case and stating our references. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Other matters regarding slavery and the black man, part 2. The reason for the deterioration and decline of this island is the lack of slaves to work the sugar mills and to mine gold as they used to. If large numbers were imported for this purpose, the royal treasury would profit greatly thereby, and this poor island would regain the title of Puerto Rico. Diego de Salamanca, Bishop of San Juan. San Juan is in a place called Puerto Rico of today. All right, so let's look at this, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. It says what? The reason for the deterioration and decline of this island, speaking about the island of Puerto Rico, right, is the lack of slaves to work the sugar mills and to mine gold as they used to. If large numbers were imported for this purpose, the royal treasury, meaning the treasury of Spain, right, would profit greatly. Thereby, this poor island would regain the title of Puerto Rico. Brothers and sisters, Puerto Rico in Spanish means rich port. The royal treasury was the treasury of Spain. Spain colonized, you may say, owned, you may say, the island that we today call Puerto Rico. So what this person is saying as the Bishop of San Juan, named Diego de Salamanca, right? What he is saying, brothers and sisters, is that to gain the title for this to be called a rich port again, you need to bring more of them slaves over to be imported. Imported from where? Let's go on. Other matters regarding slavery and the black man, part 3. Indeed, there is an urgent need for Negro slaves. Ships sail from these islands for Seville to purchase. Seville is in Spain. Clothes and other merchandise. By virtue of the said by virtue of the said ransom, let ships go there and bring away as many male and female Negroes as possible, newly imported in between the ages of 15 to 18 to 20 years. They will be made to adopt our customs. This is said, brothers and sisters, by Alonso Zuazo, judge of Hispaniola in the 16th century CE. All right, or before the 1619 date. That becomes important as we go along for edification purposes. All right. The reason and intermission. One point we care to make is that we are not saying that there were no black people in the Western Hemisphere prior to the Atlantic slave trade going west. We are not saying that the Atlantic slave trade did not go east. This is our disclaimer. However, we are saying that the bulk of the blacks in the Western Hemisphere are descended from them who were shipped in slave ships. So this is something we want to point out for a reason and purposes. Fatality. Finish it. Let's go. 1, if the Atlantic slave trade didn't go west and we blacks are the true people of this land here, indigenous in the West, what is A, our language? Pardon me, A, our culture, B, our language. What I'm asking in that is this. If we are the original people of this Western Hemisphere and we did not descend from them that were captured, kidnapped, and assaulted and stolen from Western Africa, then what is our culture and our language? In order to answer that, one must know what his or her people are. Without addressing the question with an answer, I was given responses such as one having a Cherokee in his family. I do too have Cherokee in my family. That does not negate the fact, brothers and sisters, that my immediate ancestors did come from the East in ships as captives. Let's go on. The same questions asked to them who speak of the slave trade going west are not answered by them who said the Atlantic slave trade, as told in history books, is told in reverse. There is a concept and a doctrine and a philosophy going around now saying that the Atlantic slave trade in history books, in colleges, in textbooks, and in schools is a lie, and that the Atlantic slave trade is truly told in reverse. But brothers and sisters, as we already made And our disclaimer, we're not saying, if you read this here, the reason and intermission carefully, we're not saying that the Atlantic slave trade did not go east. We're just presenting evidence that it went west also and mainly. All right, so this is something we want to talk about. Let's go on. The same questions asked to them who speak of the slave trade going west, we're reading it again for a reason, are not answered by them who said the Atlantic slave trade, as told in history books, is told in reverse. And here's the questions. Where are the ships? Question 1. Did the ships have motors? Question 2. See, these are questions that people such as myself are asked. Like, well, where are the slave ships? How can they fit that many people on there if there was no motors? But yet, some of them same people are they who say that the Atlantic slave trade is told in reverse. So it didn't go west, it only went east. So my question, throwing the ball back in your court, is did those ships have motors, and where are those ships? Let's go on, Yisrael. Israelites state essentially that to escape Greek and Roman persecution, as Rudolf Windsor did in his book, Babylon and Timbuktu, many fled to places in Africa and later were kidnapped / sold to / by Europeans and shipped to the Western Hemisphere. Not all black people believe the story as presented by the Israelites. Okay, not all black people, pardon me, it said the Israelites state that our people's true language is Hebrew. Not all black people believe that. So see what I'm saying is this. The Israelites, such as myself, are saying that our true culture is the Torah. Our true language is Hebrew. But all of our people don't accept that Hebrew is our language and Torah is our culture. An answer is given, it's just not always accepted. What I am asking is, what is the answer to the question I have? If we didn't come from the East as captives, what is our culture and language? Let's go on. Fatality, finish it, part 2. However, when we ask who are the people, pardon me, however, when we ask who are our people, what is our language, we are told a variety of responses, ranging from the people of Turtle Island, that's to say North America, the people of the Moors, the African people. The language matter is not answered by the responses of Moors, the people of Turtle Island, and African. Africa has 2 of the languages we spoke of previously, Metuneta and Amharic, as well as dozens of other languages native to that continent. So what I am asking right here is this. When we as the Israelites say that our true language is Hebrew and our true culture is the Torah, when I'm not all black people, our people accept that. Okay, so then when they give answers in many cases, such as what is our culture, that's not really addressed. It just says, oh, African culture. But Africa is a continent. So unless you can show that it is a continental culture and not say a city, a town, a tribe, or a country culture, or a clan's culture, you're going to have to show if we are just straight up African only and not from a particular group of people in Africa taken as captives, but then saying our culture is just simply glossed over by saying African, we're going to have to identify what culture is that. The next issue is in regarding language. What is our language? Because we read of Amharic, which is spoken in Ethiopia. We read of Metuneta, which is spoken or was spoken inside of what we call ancient Egypt. So the point I'm saying in both of them is in the continent of Africa. So the question, brothers and sisters, being asked here is, if we're saying, oh, we're just African, we're just the people of Turtle Island, we're just the Moors, what language is belonging to the Moors? What culture belongs to the Moors? What language belongs to African? Because there are multiple dialects and languages within that vast continent. The answer that we give as far as us as Israelites is specifically a language called Hebrew and specifically a culture called the Torah. Not everyone accepts that. So let's see what the answer can be found out when they do their own studies. May the Most High cause you to find your way. All right. 2 noted African leaders, Capoto, Zunme, Hakpan III, and Matthew Correco, I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, apologize for their people's role in the slave trade. So you can look up these particular African leaders or leaders that in certain parts of Africa that actually apologize to black people in the Western Hemisphere by saying that they apologize for their people's role inside of the slave trade. You can look up those names and see the reasoning with that. So here we have earlier Alexander Falconbridge, a European man, stating that the slave trade did happen. We've shown evidence citing Eric Williams' book, who was, may he rest in peace now, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago back in the 70s. He wrote a book called Documents of West Indian History. And he spoke about the Spanish, speaking to the Spanish crown about having black people, negros, if you will, brought from Africa as slaves. All right. And they try to appeal to them. This is for the royal treasury. You know, that kind of thing. Then you have it to where there are two noted African leaders. If I mispronounce their names, I do apologize. But they're typed there within the PowerPoint, and you can see and look them up and see if they were noted for apologizing to black people in the Western Hemisphere for their people's role in the slave trade. Are we to deny the slave trade going west after that? You got a lot of people coming out of the continent of Africa who talk about it. You got people documented in history talking about it, but yet there's some coming with a meme that's up there saying, oh, African Americans ain't African. There's a theory I have as to why some people promote that, but I'm not going to throw a theory out there. We just want to come with facts and references, not theories and ideas. Next slide. Fatality. Finished on part 3. The teaching that the Atlantic slave trade is told in reverse does not satisfy the answer to how you have Acapong, certainly from the Akan people in Jamaica. How can it be said that they were Yoruba people in South Carolina? Now, let's understand something, the island of Jamaica, right? Acapong is a place in what they call St. Elizabeth. St. Elizabeth is one of the 14 parishes in Jamaica, all right? They have a festival there in regards to the maroon leaders that we're going to get into as we go along. Or we citing our sources. We're not coming light-handed on this, all right? How can it be said that they were Yoruba people in South Carolina? It is my sincere attempt to not present as if black people were not in any part of the Western Hemisphere before the first slave ship going west, holding captives in 1518. There are indigenous black people in Malaysia, which is in East Asia. It is the attempt of many to essentially say that the Atlantic slave trade going west did not happen and that people were shipped from the west to east. Yet it seems that many never attempted to reach out to their extended family in the east or show reasoning where they in the east are saying that their ancestors came from the west. What's going on right here, brothers and sisters, in this particular part is this. The people who are saying, teaching, promoting, basically that the Atlantic slave trade is a hoax of it going west, and that the Atlantic slave trade is told in reverse, and that it really went going east. My comment on the left-hand side of this PowerPoint is this. Where are their descendants today? You see how you got black people in the west here saying that we come from the Ashanti, we come from the Congo. I don't agree with it, but there's some who want to go that route. I took the DNA test and we come from the mighty people of the Fulani. There are people who out there taking tests like that, DNA tests, and being told that they come from even different parts of Western Africa. My question is this. Where are the descendants of the people that were shipped east? If you're saying that the Atlantic slave trade, as told in history books today, is told in reverse, then you may want to find out where are the descendants of the Atlantic slave trade that went east. Because many of us here in the West are saying that the Atlantic slave trade going west, we are their descendants. So where are the descendants of those that you're talking about? I'm speaking in general when you said that it only went east. Where are those people there saying that their true land is in what you call America of today? True land is in what you call South America of today. Their true land is what they call Central America of today. There is a debate among black people. Let's just even only take the United States. We come from the land of Israel. Oh, y'all bugging. We really come from Kemet. Oh, y'all all bugging. We the mighty Nagast. We the kings of Kush. So you got a debate even within just taking the United States of black people. One group saying the land of Israel. One group saying Egypt or Kemet. You got another group saying Kush or Ethiopia. So you see, even within that, you got us arguing over here in the West about lands over in the East. Where are the people in the East arguing of saying that their lands are truly in the West? Come on now. We coming with reasoning and scholarship in the house of Yisrael. Now, we don't teach here, brothers and sisters, that we are the true people of the Egyptians. I'm just using that, or the true people of Ethiopia. We cite a European reference that said that the Israelites look like Ethiopians for edification purposes. But at the same token, what we're saying, Israel, people, brothers, sisters, black men, so-called Hispanics as well. What we're presenting, brothers and sisters, is this. When you're looking at this particular aspect, there are black people in Malaysia. There are black people in China. All right? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. I hope, and it's my sincere intent, that people would sit there and research this information that's being presented. Names, dates, times, and places. All right? Never will I cease from this subject. I will remain on said matter for edification purposes and reasoning. The identity and roots of our people will not be shortchanged, and no one online, Facebook, YouTube, and published works says nothing. I thank the Creator for having published books and will do more concerning this subject. We Israelites are told regarding Amalek, you shall not forget. Don't sell your history and place on this earth short. Don't accept a gift, a bribe, because it turns the heart of the righteous and perverts justice. Don't accept their treaties for sovereignty and verbally neglect the oppression of your people. We got laws, Yisrael, Shalom, in the language. So I just wanted that to be shown and noted for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter of South America in part. Cartagena, or Cartagena, founded in 1533 on the northern coast of New Granada, became a port for offloading blacks as slaves for shipment to the capital of Lima, Peru, and afterward reshipped to other parts of the hemisphere. Said 3,000 slaves passed through annually through Cartagena during the Portuguese hold of the Asiento. Buenos Aires, or Buenos Aires, sorry if I mispronounced it, was founded in 1580 and was a major port during such time. So let's look at this right here. This is the Viceroyalty of New Granada, and this is in the place in what you call today the area of South America. See the Caribbean Sea? See all that vicinity and all that area right there? Viceroy of New Granada. So when we read about New Granada and so forth, these are the evidences that we're talking about for edification purposes. Let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. How does North America matter in this? The countries, including the islands, which make up what is now North America, are as follows: Trinidad, Belize, Cuba, Costa Rica, Dominica, Dominican Republic, Canada, Bahamas, Antigua, Barbuda, Barbados, bold type for a reason, Haiti, Jamaica, Mexico, Guatemala, Grenada, Honduras, Panama, Nicaragua, Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, Tobago, United States of America. These places here from Trinidad listing all the way down there to the list of the United States of America is what makes up North America of today. All right, let's go on to the next slide. How does North America matter? Part 2. Looking at the list of the places identified as North America, we see the scope range regarding slavery is bigger than we thought, since many take what is the United States of America as solely being North America. We spoke earlier of the Portuguese slave traders in New York. New York was a slave state until 1826. Some sources say 1827. So I put both dates there, all right? Because when I researched the information, I seen it saying both dates. The Dutch, then the colonists, then the United States had it as a slaveholding place. We're talking about New York. First the Dutch, then the colonists, then the people of the United States. Let's go on. How does North America matter? Part 3. In the 1630s, many slave ships were captured by the Dutch, which belonged to the Portuguese. The Dutch in Manhattan had a slave trading post in 1613. The Dutch in Venezuela and St. Thomas in the 1630s had slave ports. Jonas Michilus, sorry if I mispronounced it, of New Amsterdam, which is today called New York, stated the slaves were thievish, lazy, and useless trash. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. How does North America matter? Part 4. A Dane man named Johan de Willem, having received a license to operate as a slave trader in the West Indies, Brazil, Virginia, and Guinea, which by the 17th century seemed to have been one slave fortress. In 1619, the blacks as slaves brought to John Wolfe were brought to him by a Dutch man of war. We spoke earlier of the matter regarding the trade in North America by the European nations of Spain and Portugal. Let's go on to the next slide. The reason. Due to the recent attacks against blacks as slaves in what is now referred to as the United States, we wanted to show that the United States was a baby in comparison to places like Brazil, Barbados, and other places regarding slavery and the slave trade. To separate, let's go in now, to separate the black man in the United States from the black man in the Caribbean is a work of Willie Lynch. Though Willie Lynch may not, like Jim Crow, have been a living person, the concept of each is practiced and thus gives life to the doctrine, be it Jim Crow or Willie Lynch. The Willie Lynch argument is saying that in 1712, a man went from the West Indies to Virginia and was telling them how to sit there and deal with the black people as slaves. So his solution was you put the old versus the young, the light-skinned ones versus the dark-skinned ones versus the light-skinned ones. Then you have the male versus the female versus the male. So then the argument came, well, the Willie Lynch letter was written by an intelligent college professor, and Willie Lynch never really existed. But when you sit there, brothers and sisters, and go into the dark skin and light skin thing, you just gave Willie Lynch life. So even if Willie Lynch was a paper, an article written by a college professor in the 1970s or so, brothers and sisters, the ideology, the mentality, the thought process that is invoked in the Willie Lynch letter is being worked even by some of our people. Those are the coconuts. The black man in North America is lazy. The black people in the West Indies are violent. Brothers and sisters, when Marcus Garvey came from Jamaica and came to what's now called the United States, and he created an organization and so forth and so on, white people were telling black people from the West Indies, don't trust those black Americans. Those guys are lazy. Y'all guys are hard workers, and y'all can have your own government. These niggers that you see over here in North America, they're still under our thumb. The white man couldn't handle y'all niggers in Jamaica, so they went back to England. That's what they was telling black people in the West Indies during the era of Marcus Garvey. Get your history up. You understand? And then they told black people from North America or in North America, don't you trust those black people in the Caribbean because they witches, They're sex mad, they're violent, and they're crazy. They're part of the Maroons, and they then define Maroons as morons. You understand? So these are things that was actually going on when you had a great unity base between many people in the West Indies and many people in what you call the United States, all being of color, brothers and sisters. And it's the same thing that's being done when you sit there and promote the concept by saying, quote unquote, African Americans ain't African, as if our people in Jamaica, Nevis, Trinidad, Dominica don't matter. You understand? Because when you say African American and talk about what you refer to as Turtle Island, you're not talking about the black man in Panama and Colón or what they call Rainbow City. You're not thinking about them in Brazil that live in places such as Colombia of today. You're not thinking about them. And I know because I conversed on the subject. Well, brother, you're talking about the West Indies. I'm talking about America. So you can keep this cold climate if you want, black man. For us, the house of Israel, we know our land is in the East. When you even listen to many of the reggae songs in spirit, they talk about their lands being over there in the East. You understand? You ain't getting no consciousness coming out of North America. You ain't getting no consciousness coming up out of the sugar cane. You ain't getting no consciousness coming up out of the cotton field. You get consciousness when you leave the black men alone. And what did he say? Even though it may have to be studied and researched into, the original black man is what? The Asiatic black man. Leave the black man to his own lonesome and see the concepts that he developed in his own mind, and he will come up with something such as saying, we belong to the East. We are the Asiatic black man. So even in looking at that particular aspect, who is teaching that we must have only here from the Western Hemisphere? What does the Western Hemisphere produce that anybody in the East needs? The Western Hemisphere imports. What does the Western Hemisphere bring to the world? The only thing the people who beloved the Western Hemisphere did was exploit and steal and kidnap and pillage the peoples of the East, be they from Africa or be they from Asia. This is why you speak about the guy Vasco de Gama going all the way to India. That's why Columbus, I'm trying to sit there and find where the other stuff is at. Oh, spices. Oh, I found niggas. You understand? So these are things we just want to show for edification purposes. All right? So let's go on, brothers and sisters, if we will, in this particular aspect. North Carolina and Virginia, the place where my mama and my papa come from. Let's go on, Yisrael. In 1730, there were 6,000 blacks as slaves in North Carolina, purchased in Virginia. North Carolina stated that it received the refused, refractory, and distempered Negroes. In North Carolina's government in the 18th century CE, they stated that they received the distempered and the refused, refractory Negroes that Virginia didn't want. Let's go on. Many of the captors taken to what is now North America were reshipped from the West Indies. George Washington was part of such. You know, he was the president of the United States. Also, the English in 1605 controlled Barbados, which was a place used to drop off, then reship blacks as captives. You can refer to a book called The Black Book, written by a guy named Middleton Harris. Come on, Yisrael, we come in with our sources. See, you're not going to show a meme speaking about people of color's history and legacy and just present that up there like, oh, that's what's supposed to say. No, you got to come with something better than a meme, brother or sister. You understand? So getting into this particular aspect, that book called The Black Book, the cheapest I saw it for was $40-something online. But in that book, it talks about how George Washington in the 1760s was trading black people as slaves from North America to the West Indies back and forth. And one of those guys being named Jack. All right. So getting into this particular aspect, this is where the reference comes from. A book called The Black Book, written by Middleton Harris. Let's go on to the next slide. Oh, here we go. The Irish and the Jewish people. Because, you know, in this particular subject, there was even, because you never know who's on Facebook, where they want to come and state certain things. Because just like white boys want to go in black mask, and black paint and pose as black men doing crimes, that could backfire. Because when the cops run in and shoot the black guy, then they take the markings of like, oh, it's a white guy. He was trying to portray a nigga and got shot. So the point, getting back into this particular aspect, brothers and sisters, looking at this right here, it says the Irish and the Jewish people. Because see, they come and talk about the Irish were enslaved, Jewish people were oppressed. Listen, man. Did you know that the Japanese used to put cigarette butts in Chinese people's ears and blow their brains out? Did you know that North and South Vietnam had problems and conflict? North and South Korea had problems and conflict? Did you know that the East Indian in India and Asia was oppressed by the Chinese? I want you to understand what I'm saying. Japan at one time oppressed the Chinese. At one time, the Chinese in Asia oppressed the Indians in Asia. So here's my question in this. Can I, as a black man, and I'm only using the term black for edification purposes, all right? Can I, as a black man, tell the Chinese person not to worry about what the Japanese did? You know what happened? The same thing that happened with black men when they went to the Vietnam War. Nigga, mind your business. This ain't got nothing to do with you. This is not your war. Go back home to the Bronx, to Harlem, and do your YouTube videos there and so forth. I cannot, in spirit, in comfort, tell a Chinese person that he or she should not wonder and worry and speak on the oppression that Japan has done to them. I don't have that right. The people in Rome used to oppress the people in Florence in ancient times. I cannot tell the people of Florence, don't worry about what the Romans did to you. Get over it. I would just have to be one to just mind my business. Know where you fit in at. But when you don't know your land, language, and culture, and you think we're all one, everybody's the same, you don't know when to mind your business because you don't know what business to mind. I will never tell an East Indian, don't worry about what China did to you in the 17 and 1600s. That's not my place. I will never tell brothers and sisters, a Russian, don't worry about the oppression that the Turks did to you, when the Ottomans did to you. I would never tell a Russian person that, because the Ottoman Turks at one time used to oppress Russia. I can't tell a Russian person, don't worry about that, forget it, it's in the past. Like they tell us, citing Irish and Jewish people, talking about, oh, the Irish went through things, nigga, don't worry about your past. That only works with somebody who doesn't have a strong spirit. The God that I serve, Yah, said to be strong and of good courage. So you're not going to present the Irish and the Jewish people to me and let me forget about what happened with Nat Turner. Let me forget about what happened with Solomon Northup. Let me forget what happened in the aspect of Demark Vesey. Let me forget about what happened with the black woman chained on the slave ship and raped by the white man. No, I'm not going to sit there and forget that because you want to present Irish children, white children oppressed by the British who are white. That is the Irish and the British, a white man's problem. That's not my business. My business is not to try to disseminate and try to get their problems straight. We got to first sit there and talk about our people's problems and our history. That's why the black man is laughed at. Everybody knows your history. Did you know there was an Israelite elder that found out he was an Israelite in the Korean War in the 1950s? He went to the Korean War, and that's when they told him, Negro, you are the people of the tribes of Israel. Koreans know this. Irish people know this. This is not a secret to them. They teach their children, those people that you see on the movie shooting themselves every night in Menace to Society, those are the real Hebrews. They know that. That's not a secret. Be a black person talking Hebrew around Irish and see how their spirit is. See how their reaction is. I know from what I'm talking about going on jobs. Yes, I had an Irish supervisor. I need this time off. That's the Jewish holiday. Well, I just need that time off. And you never want to come in on Saturdays for overtime, Hutchinson? That's what I was asked. You never come in on Saturday. I'm not making this up. You never come in on Saturday, and now you need this extra day off that happens to be the Jewish holiday? Brothers and sisters, that man knew what I knew that I refused to tell him. I tried to be like the male version of Esther and not let the nations know who I was. But by me taking certain days off for work and refusing overtime on Shabbat, that man knew what it was. He knew what it was. He tried to make a joke. I'm not making this up to sound special. I'm talking from experience. You understand? He tried to make a joke later on saying, oh, I think this guy is Islamic because of the days he takes off. Because they happen to see one of our head coverings or a kippah that you see us even wearing in the camp sometime on a desk. So he tried to sit there and make a joke, but he knew exactly what it was. I didn't take off for Eid. I didn't sit there and celebrate Ramadan the 5 years I worked in that building. So they knew good and well I wasn't Muslim or Islamic. Eid and Ramadan are Islamic holy days and holidays for Muslims. So by me never observing that, but being shown or having a cultural garment left on the desk and taken off around the time and on the time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread and consistently rejecting overtime on Saturday, which is the Shabbat, that man knew exactly what it was. He knew there was no way that Hutchinson was just a regular dude, the regular black guy. No, he knew something about that nigga. You understand? I'm just keeping it 100 because that's how they talk about you in your house. Let's go on, but we still want to keep it professionally. All right? The Irish and the Jewish people. In 1724, an Irish man named Thomas Emery wrote, in the fall, we expect Negroes directly from Guinea. Rum was used from Boston to trade with African merchants in regards to capturing blacks as slaves. Jewish people pretending to be Christians participated in the slave trade. One notable Jewish person in the slave trade was Samuel Alexandre. So this is something we want to sit there and point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. In 1724, an Irish man named Thomas Emery. So when they talk about there was Irish children taken by the British into Barbados and they was treated bad, I'm just thinking about, hold on, this is Thomas Emery. So you're telling me about the British taking Irish children as slaves, bringing them over here to the Western Hemisphere and treating children as slaves among the Irish by the British, who neither one being black, in the 1600s. And these Irish people is recorded in the 1700s as waiting for new Negroes as captives from Guinea. So let me get the morality point that I'm trying to address right here. After the British enslaved the Irish, you're telling me that the Irish should not sit there and be looked upon in a bad light by those who are into studying black history, even though the Irish is recorded after the British enslaved them, of them together enslaving black people. No, it don't go that way. See, if you can show the opposite, where the British was enslaving the Irish people in the 1700s, then we can talk about that. But if you're telling me that the British enslavement of the Irish children was in the 1600s, and then you're turning right around and able to be shown a reference about the Irish people waiting for black people in the 1700s, the Irish people didn't care about having slaves then. They didn't look and say, a fellow human being should not be enslaved because we were enslaved and we know how that feeling is. No, they got paid off for that slave trade. You understand? This is what happens when you have, blessed be the Most High, a spirit that says what? Be strong and of good courage. You don't kowtow and buckle down because white people oppress white people, so I'm not supposed to worry about the oppression that black people go through. No, it don't go like that, brothers and sisters. You understand? So let's go on. Additional notes concerning the subject. During the American Revolution, salt, which was produced in Anguilla, was destroyed. The American Revolution was during the 18th century. According to Mavis Campbell in the book Maroons of Jamaica, there were Igbo, said sometimes as Igbo, people in Jamaica as slaves. According to John Blasingame, who was a college professor, may he rest in peace, there were Yoruba as slaves in what we call the United States of today. According to LaRon Bennett in his book, Before the Mayflower, there were people from the Ashanti people taken as slaves to the Western Hemisphere. So these are things we want to point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. All right, John Blasingame, a historian, LaRon Bennett, a historian, Mavis Campbell, a very humble person. When you read that book entitled Maroons of Jamaica, this author is a very, very humble person. All right, I suggest people to get the books and look up these authors that are being cited. All right. during the American Revolution, which is in the 1700s, salt which was produced in Anguilla was destroyed. Why does that become important? Because Anguilla, correct me if I'm wrong, is in the islands, it's in the West Indies. So they traded products from the West Indies to what's called North America. The salt, what will stop you from trading the slaves? Let's go on. Additional notes on the subject, part 2. In light of the fact that there were white slaves and black slave masters, we must remember that the entire thought process of slavery in the Western Hemisphere is that of the European. There were, brothers and sisters, black people who did own white people as slaves, such as Anthony Johnson. But you know what happened? Anthony Johnson's children lost the land by the state of Virginia after he died. So the slaves that were there for in that particular case were freed. So we just want to point that out for edification purposes. So when I sit there and cite brothers and sisters by saying that the entire thought process of slavery in the Western Hemisphere, not slavery itself, but slavery in the Western Hemisphere, like somebody in the chat said, the chattel slavery is that of the European. Brothers and sisters, let's look at the black nation of the Philistines. Let's look at the black nation of the Israelites. What did Goliath say to the armies of the children of Israel? To give the Philistines some credit. Goliath presented a case to the Israelites in the Bible. When you go in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 17, he said, bring ye out a champion, and if he slays me, we will become your slaves. And if I slay him, you will become our slaves. See, that's how black nations got slaves, by debt or war. You had to fight to get a certain aspect, or you had to steal and wind up being, like the Torah says, sold for your death. So let's understand something. Theft, not death. All right? Let's understand something. All right? If I stole something in Israelite culture, all right, that's worth $50,000, and I can't give back that $50,000, I got to work that off by becoming that person's servant. Stealing in Israelite culture means you got to show restitution, either by paying it back or by selling yourself. That's what it means when it said one is sold for their own theft. Kidnapping was frowned upon in many cultures, such as that of the Israelites, such as that in many cases in Western Africa, not all, but in many cases. All right. For instance, in the Bible, in Torah, it says, whosoever stealeth a man and holds him as a slave, mot yumat, he shall surely be put to death. You understand? So when Goliath presented his argument to the armies of Israel, and he said, bring ye out a champion, and if he killed me, we Philistines will be your slaves. And if I kill him, y'all Israelites will be our slaves. The Israelites, they didn't back down, but they also didn't step up until David stepped up. So the point I'm saying in all of that is this. Even if you listened to this presentation earlier, and when I cited the thing and showed the thing from the Amistad movie, well, how will in Africa will they become slaves? Debt. You get in debt one way by theft, war. So if you wanted to be free in certain cases, it may sound like tough love. You got to know, excuse my language, how to throw your knuckles up, how to throw your hands up. Because there are people out there who just want to take advantage of you, even in black societies, like in the situation with David and Goliath. You understand? So these are things that we just want to point out. The European thought that I'm talking about in this slide is you're going to go in there, bribe a chief, and then steal the people, and then kill the chief, because that's what happened in the slave trade. See, this is what we want to talk about for edification purposes. All right? So the black people who owned slaves that were white slaves did not own them, correct me if I'm wrong, past 2 generations. Let's go on. See the difference? In 1741, a white woman was hung because of a slave uprising in New York. In 1640, John Punch was made a permanent slave in Virginia. In 1803, in Georgia, many Igbo, said by some as Igbo, people who gained control of the ship were captured and refused to give in to the recaptors. So what's going on? Brothers and sisters, as being cited right here, all right? There were people who were captured in 1803 in Georgia from among the Igbo people, and they're from Nigeria, right? They gained control of the ship, and they refused to give in to the recaptors, meaning that when the Europeans recaptured the ship, the people on it was still not willing to just submit. In 1640, John Punch was made a permanent slave in Virginia. Why does this line here become important? Because we spoke earlier briefly about the matter with Anthony Johnson and so forth and so on. There is a European, a white guy, that made a video about black slave owners, and it's online. But the guy never talked about John Punch, because see, the whole Anthony Johnson matter, brothers and sisters, dates to the era of 1654 and 1655. You understand? Whereas when you look at this right here, John Punch, which was a black man, was made a permanent slave in Virginia, the same state where Anthony Johnson was in 1640. So we're talking over 13, 14 years before the Anthony Johnson matter. There was already a black man made a permanent slave in Virginia. This is why I emphasize when I stated this here, that the entire thought process of slavery in the Western Hemisphere is that of the European and not the people of the East. All right, let's go on. When I say East, I mean Africa or Western Asia, okay? Additional notes of the matter, part 3. In 1816, there was a revolt of slaves in Barbados. In 1823, there was a revolt of slaves in what is now part of Guyana, Suriname, to be quite candid, at that time. In 1830, there was a revolt in Virginia, the matter of with Nat Turner. In 1822, there was a revolt in South Carolina, the matter with Denmark Vesey. In 1842, there was a revolt in Oklahoma, blacks as slaves to the Cherokee. The above information can be researched. So when you look up these dates about slave revolts and when it happened and where it happened, 1816, Barbados. 1823, Suriname, which was at that time part of Guyana. 1830, Virginia. 1822, South Carolina. 1842, in Oklahoma, blacks as slaves to the Cherokee. Because everybody who studies this information will know good and well that the Cherokee, when America said, we got to let the Negroes go, the Cherokee was like, no, I'm keeping, no. The American government, Cherokee, we got to let the Negroes go. We have the Industrial Revolution. I'm not getting rid of my niggas. So Cherokee, being some of our ancestors as black people, is just like some of our ancestors as black people who are white people. Many of us as black people here have white ancestry. Many of us who are black people here have Cherokee ancestry. Cherokees and the European man both enslaved the black man. The Seminole that is in the state that you currently today call Florida fought against enslaving the black man. Then, decades later, told the black man to get up out of the place where the Seminoles is at. So let's go on for edification purposes. The Nat Turner matter. If we are to think that slavery did not exist, or as some have said, it was over in 1808, that was the theory, slavery was over in 1808. We have not done proper research. The matter with Nat Turner, which was in the 1830s, and that what made him famous was the revolt he did along with others in Northampton, Virginia. He was not a Native American man trying to regain his land. He was a black man who was literate and used the Bible as a way to influence the revolt. John Travers, Elizabeth Turner, Hartwell Prebles, Sarah Newsom, Trajan Doyle, John Barrow, George Vaughan, Edwin Drury, among others, was slain in a revolt led by Nat Turner. So those some of the names, not all, because there's over 50 people in the Nat Turner revolt that's of the Europeans that were slain. All right, but this is just some of the names here. John Travers, Elizabeth Turner, Hartwell Prebles, Sarah Newsom, or New One, sorry, Trajan Doyle, John Barrow, George Vaughan, Edwin Drury in the 1830 revolt with the matter with Nat Turner. So much for the idea that slavery ended in 1808, according to some. What did happen around 1808 is when they tried to enforce what was made a law in 1807, that the slave trade itself was deemed illegal, but slavery was still not illegal. So let's understand that, brothers and sisters. Next slide. The matter with Toussaint Louverture. He was the military leader that led Haiti to be free. He died in 1803, but left a legacy that helped make other people, such as in North America, the United States, want to strike for liberty and freedom as well. All right, so what we're looking at right here, brothers and sisters, is what? Toussaint Louverture led what they called guerrilla warfare, brothers and sisters, in the island that is today called Haiti. All right, and Haiti became the first freed people in 1804. Let's go on. If one denies that the slave trade happening and one denies that slavery was here in the Western Hemisphere, then one has no reason to celebrate the emancipation of the captors. All right, brothers and sisters, I meant to say emancipation of the captives. Sorry, but getting back into the point here, if one denies that the slave trade happening and one denies that slavery was here in the Western Hemisphere, then one has no reason to celebrate the emancipation. All right? So this is something, brothers and sisters, we want to point out for edification purposes. All right? The Cherokees lived in the area vicinity of Tennessee, to respond to somebody in the chat. All right, but you can't, as a black person who say slavery never happened, the slave trade never happened. So when Haiti jumps up for joy about being the first freed people in the Western Hemisphere, and they have celebrations in the Caribbean, and black people even in North America talk about what we call Juneteenth, Juneteenth, Juneteenth in North America and so forth and so on, or in the United States. If you deny that the slave trade happened, you don't have no reason to clap your hands for joy. You should just keep on going about in your society with no language and no culture. Let's go on. You're not going to disrespect somebody's ancestor struggle and expect to be told things with a pat on the wrist. A lot of people told me, stop saying the terminology that I've been saying, no offense intended. In this one, I'm not saying no offense intended. If you're offended, I'm just citing my sources. Take it up with them. Take it up with the publishers who put the information out. Because in this presentation, I'm taking the advice that my lady told me, due respect to her for helping me get this together, and that other people have told me, stop Moray saying no offense intended. Because I'm not saying that in this one right here. The code noir matter. Sorry if I mispronounced the French word for black, wrong. But noir is French, if I'm saying it right, for black. All slaves shall be baptized and instructed in the Roman, Catholic, and Apostolic faith. Slaves are not allowed to carry weapons or large sticks. Slaves who hit their master or master's family shall be put to death. Slaves who escape for a month shall have their ears cut off and branded. This is from Louis XIV in 1685. The place called Louisiana today is named after him. So what are we dealing with right here, brothers and sisters, is this. They have what they call the Black Code or the Black Law or the Code Noir. And it was made in the 1680s by the King of France by the name of Louis XIV. And in it, it spoke about black people that were to be made, brothers and sisters, to go into the Catholic religion. And if you were to hit the slave master or the slave master family, that was a death penalty. All right? And so there's no reason, knowing good and well that Louisiana was named after him, that such things did not happen. Let's go on. They're not going to have a code of law for something that's a myth. The reason, part 2. The reason for said presentation was due to the fact that many are currently saying that the slave trade did not occur from Africa to the Western Hemisphere. Many who say such do not take into consideration the black people from the West Indies or from South America. Many who speak of Turtle Island are only talking about black people in a place currently called the United States. Much history and reasoning was brought out, and I am open to constructive criticism. Shalom. Next part. The appendix. The definition of drapetomania. It says this. Samuel Cartwright in 1851 coined the term, saying it is a mental disorder regarding blacks as slaves who wanted to escape. They said, brothers and sisters, in the 1850s that black people who wanted to escape from slavery had a mental disorder called drapetomania. And you can look this up. And then we see the most famous quote, "I could have freed more slaves if only they knew they were slaves," by Harriet Tubman. Next slide. Thank you. The appendix. Declaration of the causes which impelled the state of Texas to secede from the federal union. She, Texas, was received into the Confederacy with her own constitution under the guarantee of the federal constitution and the compact of annexation, that she should enjoy these blessings. She was received as a commonwealth holding, maintaining, and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of the African to the white race within her limits. So this right here, when it speaks about Texas succeeding, that was during the era of the Civil War. So a declaration of the causes which impel the state of Texas to succeed from the federal union. So the Confederacy was the southern states that wanted to uphold slavery. The Union, all right, was the northern states that didn't want to end slavery, but just limit slavery. So the Civil War was not practiced or done, or the Civil War was not on the northern state side to end slavery. It was, brothers and sisters, to make sure slavery didn't go to places far west. When you read about the compromise of 1820 and the Missouri Compromise and the situation with 1850 and all of those things, the Civil War that sparked off in 1861 was in the thought process since the 1820s. Because the North and South, for political reasons, was having drama or contention with one another. All right, so looking at this right here, it said that she, speaking of Texas, was received into the Confederacy with her own constitution. What is being stated right here is that Texas stated that they succeeded from the Union because she wanted to keep slavery, the servitude of the African to the white race within her limits. And the North was saying, we have to just marginalize slavery, and then we can hope that it'll just be eradicated. And the South saw the North game, and so therefore they attack Fort Sumter in 1861. All right, so this is something we want to point out. The North in the Civil War was a two-faced person. The South in the Civil War, brothers and sisters, was a straight up, keeping it real, I hate you black niggas. The African burial ground matter in New York. At Duane Street in New York City, downtown Manhattan, there are over 400 blacks buried. Some were free, most were not. This dates back to the era of the 17th and 18th centuries. All right, let's go and remember the slide for the future reference. The Brown Brothers matter in Sally. In the year 1765, Essex Hawkins, who was master of the ship Sally, stated that soon after he left the coast, the number of his men being reduced by sickness, he was obliged to permit some of the slaves to come upon deck to assist the people. These slaves contrived to release the others and hold roles upon the people, and endeavored to get possession of the vessel, but was happily prevented by the captain and his men, who killed, wounded, and forced overboard 80 of them, which obliged the rest to submit. So what's going on in this particular aspect is this, all right? It's saying this, brothers and sisters, right? You have it. the Brown Brothers Matter and Sally. All right. In the year 1765, it talks about the slave ship named Sally, and that the people who were the captives, the black people, the slaves, the captives, if you will, right? They were made to come upon deck, but when they did that, they contrived one with another to release the others. And then they were led back down after many of them were killed, wounded, and forced overboard. This comes from an article called the Newport Mercury, dated to November 18th, 1765. You're going to still sit there with all these references, still sit there and wonder if slavery happened in North America or the West Indies? We're citing our sources, Israel. We're not just coming off the top of our head. And for all the people talking about Israelites only cite the Bible, this presentation is over 2 hours so far. We ain't cite the Bible yet. Okay? Not in the PowerPoint. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. The aspect of slavery in American capitalism. More than half of the nation's exports in the first 60 years of the 19th century consisted of raw cotton, almost all of it grown by slaves. Slavery was present in the counting houses of Lower Manhattan, the spinning mills of New England, and the warships of budding manufacturers in the Blackstone Valley in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, as on the plantations in the Yazoo, Mississippi Delta. And what I stated is cited from a book written by Walter Johnson. The name of the book is called River of Dark Dreams. More than half of the nation's exports in the first 60 years of the 19th century, that is to say from 1800 to 1860, more than half of the nation's exports consisted of raw cotton, almost all of it grown by slaves. Let's go on, if we will. The aspect of slavery in American capitalism, part 2. Merchants in New York City, Boston, and other places, like the Browns in cotton and the Taylors in sugar, organized the trade of slave-grown agricultural commodities, accumulating vast riches in the process. The profits accumulated through slave labor had a lasting impact. Both the Browns and the Taylors eventually moved out of the commodities trade and into banking. The Browns created an institution that survives to this day, as Brown brothers Harriman and Moses Taylor took charge of the precursor of Citibank. All right? Chemical Bank used to be what's now called Citibank. Correct me if I'm wrong. All right? But Brown brothers Harriman has a building in downtown Manhattan. Brown brothers Harriman monies is what was made during the slave trade. The aspect of slavery in American capitalism. Let's go on. The matter of South Carolina and slavery. America's third president, Mr. Johnson, and a revolution. In 1739, there was a Stono Rebellion, and this caused South Carolina to want to suspend the slave trade brought into South Carolina from Africa. In 1751, a tax was put on them, bringing blacks as slaves from Africa. In 1760, South Carolina suspended the trade altogether. Jefferson, that's to say that Thomas Jefferson, stated this: Virginians favored the abolition of domestic slavery, and for this to occur, it is necessary to exclude all further importations from Africa. Thomas Jefferson, you know, the one that's always talking about with Sally Hemings, who had children and so forth from his black mistress, probably was a rapist to her, more than likely. I didn't see any information about him being a rapist in hardcore literature, so I'm just stating, knowing their spirit, it could perhaps be. It can't be ruled out yet, because you can't be a slave and a wife. Your wife is not your slave. Okay, so let that be noted for edification purposes. He stated Virginians, that is to say the people of Virginia, favored the abolition of domestic slavery, and for this to occur, it is necessary to exclude all further importations from Africa. That is something that Thomas Jefferson stated. So another source showing the fact that the slave trade did go from the east to the west. All right. The American Revolution caused states to suspend the slave trade, and after the revolution, some ended it completely. Georgia, only due to the Haitian Revolution, ended the slave trade, not slavery itself. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter of Guadeloupe and Martinique. The French owned during the slavery era the places Guadeloupe and Martinique. There were ships captured by the French, which were leaving from Newport in the 18th century. The ship owners eventually brought new ships and loaded them with cargoes from the Guinea coast. Pine, lumber, and saltfish were traded with hogsheads and molasses, and along with it was a dozen or so slaves as part of the deck cargo. So what we're looking at regarding Guadeloupe and Martinique, I wanted to show where this is at on the map. All right, in the aspect of the West Indies. You see Martinique, Guadeloupe. Let's go on. The matter of Guadeloupe and Martinique, part 2. Ligneur de l'Olive, sorry if I mispronounced the name, received from France the places called Guadeloupe and Martinique in the 17th century. In the 1620s to the 1630s, about 2,500 blacks as slaves were brought to Guadeloupe and Martinique. In 1848, slavery was abolished in Guadeloupe and Martinique. So, brothers and sisters, we wanted to point this out for edification purposes. Why do I emphasize about 1848 regarding Guadeloupe and Martinique? Let's look at the slide before this for edification purposes. You see where it says French West Indies. Let that map, French West Indies. The British West Indies ended slavery in 1838. The French still continued it on the islands that the French was at all the way dating into the 1840s. So that's why I wanted to point that out for edification purposes. Let's go on. Next slide. The matter with Jamaica. Jamaica, the island was colonized by the Spaniards in 1509 and taken over by the British in 1655. There was in Jamaica slavery, the people from Ashanti and Igbo. According to Mavis Campbell in the book Maroons of Jamaica, cited before, right? The blacks who were captive in Jamaica took to the mountains and fought 3 wars against the European colonial powers. One in 1655, one in 1731, and one in 1796. The coffee plantations in Jamaica, the Blue Mountains, it is said that plantations were intentionally designed for surveillance of slave activities. So I just wanted to point this out for edification purposes with names, dates, sources, times, and so forth. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter with Jamaica, part 2. Blacks as slaves from the Gold Coast were called Coromantes after the port called Coromantine, which many of them were exported. The Coromantee may have been from different tribes, but mostly from the Fanti and Ashanti, which is a place, or pardon me, the people in Ghana. William Snellgraf in the 18th century spoke of the Coromantee Negroes. He was an ivory and slave trader working for the British. Edward Long, in History of Jamaica, wrote that 33 Coromantee Negroes rose up and within 1 hour slew no less than 19 whites. So this is something we just want to show for edification purposes. Now, when you type up freedom fighters in Jamaica, Coromantee, slaves in Jamaica, the Maroons, and so forth and so on, these are some of the images that come up. All right. So this is something we want to show for edification purposes. All right. So we are citing our sources. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter with Jamaica, part 3. The Spanish Succession War caused England to be a dominant power in Europe. England gained control from the Gambia to the Congo, as well as the use of the Asiento. Jamaica was the main port, and many in the thousands were shipped there. Du Bois estimates after 1713 the number as 40,000 to 100,000 a year, Jamaica being the main port. More were reaching, yes, the American mainland. Let's go on. This is from Du Bois in his book. The This means that trying to separate the history of the blacks in North American mainland and they in the West Indies is the work of them who seem to want to hide history. All right. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. All right. So if many was sent to Jamaica, estimated by Du Bois after 1713, a number ranging from 40,000 to 100,000. Jamaica being the breaking point or port where many of them were brought to, many were then brought to the American mainland. That's why we don't sit there and teach the separation between the so-called Black American in North America and the so-called Black man, woman, and child in the West Indies. And those who do teach that, that's the Willie Lynch concept, the Willie Lynch theology, the Willie Lynch doctrine that they're endorsing. Let's go on. Blacks in Haiti and Brazil. See, these are the people that black people in North America seem to forget about when they start talking about we are indigenous to Turtle Island. You forgot about all these brothers, sisters, and elders that look like you, all of them in Haiti and Brazil. So let's understand what we're talking about for edification purposes. Next slide. Map of Jamaica, image of runaway. Now, this right here is the island of Jamaica. Jamaica is divided up into 14 different parishes. All right. Some of them, correct me if I'm wrong, is like Kingston, St. Elizabeth, St. Mary. There's some other ones. But the point I'm just saying is those will come off the top of my head, like Catherine and so forth. All right. Or St. Catherine, as it was called or is called. Now, looking at this on the right-hand side, you have it to where these are some of the images of the Maroons, all right, that were actually escaped people that fled into the mountains for freedom purposes only, all right? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Let's go on, if you will, to the next slide so we can set the record straight. Slaves to the Americas, sugar to New England, rum and goods to Africa. See how that went with that regard? So if you're asking me where the ships are at, but at the same token saying that the slave trade went from the west to the east, I can ask you the same question. Where are those ships at? All right. There are people that are even in the chat. One person stated, Maroons are respected. Yes, the Maroon Treaty is still in place until today in Jamaica. So let's look and just take, for instance, not trying to be nitpicky, but this island here that is called Jamaica today, all right, which was inhabited by the original people called the Arawaks, all right? And then you see here, slaves to the Americas. So they were leaving from Africa and brought to the Americas with the S at the end, meaning more than one. So when you start talking about the Turtle Island of North America, in regards to the United States and some treaty that was made with the presidents and so forth, talking about we have freedom here and sovereignty and don't have to pay taxes. I'm not going to sit there and neglect my people that you're looking at right here. I want this to be noted for edification purposes. We are Israelites. We are told to not forget Amalek. All right. I'm not going to forget my people right here that you see in this map, pardon me, in this picture right here for some treaty that is supposed to sit there and have me no longer pay taxes. I'd rather take a plane or a boat and go to West Africa and live if I could. I'd rather take a plane and boat and go live in Hebron in the land of Yisrael if I can. I'm not signing no treaty with the European American government to sit up there and say, I don't have to sit there and pay any taxes. I'd rather go back to the lands of the East. All right. So we want that to be noted for edification purposes. So this is something, brothers and sisters, we want to highlight in that regard. Next slide. From fighting oppression to celebration in the West Indies. Now, once again, I typed in the Maroon guy, Leonard Parkinson, and this is the image that came up, and then celebration in Jamaica. And as you can see right here, from fighting oppression to celebration. Now, why did I put this right here? Because if you're saying that slavery never happened in the Western Hemisphere, which in most cases they're only talking about North America because they want some free tax write-off or whatever in the world, according to some. When these people are celebrating, you don't clap hands with them, Israel. That's Israel as well that you see in a picture. But you can't clap hands with them because they're celebrating being free and having their own space and land. You're saying that we were never enslaved. So you don't have the right to claim Denmark Vesey. You don't have the right to claim Nat Turner. You don't have the right to claim Sojourner Truth. You don't have the right to claim Harriet Tubman. You don't have the right to claim Thurgood Marshall. You understand? Once it comes down with that kind of subject matter. So let's go on for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. Mapped for those who care. This is a map of what happened in the slave trade. Now, as we stated in our disclaimer, right, we're not saying that the slave trade didn't go from the west to the east. We're saying the majority, as shown in this map right here, went from the east to the west, mainly heavily into Brazil, all right, over 30% alone, only to that one particular country, all right. So now looking at this right here, right, you have it coming from Southeast Africa, going south of South Africa, all the way into Brazil. Then you got those from East Africa that's going all the way up into India and into parts of Saudi Arabia. Then you got the ones that's south of the Sahara that was taken up into northern parts of Africa and then shipped into Europe. Then you got the bulk of the ones that we kept on talking about that was taken from Western Africa and shipped over here into the West. The minority number being that which you see there brought to what we call the United States of today. The majority being South America, then after that, the West Indies, then after that, North America. What am I saying? Is that the slave trade, brothers and sisters, going west mainly went to South America, then to the West Indies, then the lowest amount going to North America. So when they start talking about we are the original people of North America that you see there on the left-hand part of the slide, the northern part of it or the top part of it, they're not considering the ones that was shipped over to India that you see there on the map. They're not considering the ones that were shipped from Eastern Africa to Brazil. They're not considering the ones like Zumbi dos Palmares, Ganga Zumba, Acetarene, Comocon, and all the other maroon leaders that were in Brazil and what they call Palmares. They're not thinking about Nanny, Leonard Parkinson, Al Capone, that was the maroon leaders that was in the island of Jamaica. They're not thinking about Daga from Trinidad, that was the maroon leader over there. They're not thinking about the maroon leaders that was in Mississippi and throughout the swamps of Georgia. Brothers and sisters, when we deal in history, we're not playing games, brothers and sisters. We are showing our references, and you can check this all out. Let's go on, if we will. All right? Looking at this, Senegambia, Sierra Leone, the Windward Coast, Biafra, the Gold Coast, Benin. Why did I put that map there? Henry the Navigator's men in the 15th century CE was saying that they went to look for gold and they found slaves. So we were then called by some black gold during the slave trade. You understand? Let's go on to the next slide. Maps for those who care. Once again, showing that same map from there. But the Gold Coast colony that you see, Kumasi, which is over in Ghana, all right, Bright of Benin. Now, when you look at the map on the right-hand side carefully, it distinctly shows Slave Coast. Historians, authors, educators, none of them are denying that the slave trade happened, going west. Some try to come with an apologetic attitude. Let's just not talk about it so much. Bygones be bygones. That's some of their spirits, like the two leaders out of Africa that I spoke about earlier by name, saying that they apologize to the black people in North America and the Western Hemisphere for their people's enrollment or involvement in the slave trade. There are, as we mentioned it earlier, all right, it's on the slide, or pardon me, it's on this presentation. So getting back into this, right? It says what? Maps for those who care. The Gold Coast colony, Kumasi. There is, brothers and sisters, Elmina Fort Castle, where they had people as slaves, and it's still up to this day. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are fort houses built where people were housed in as captives. People in Africa don't deny that. Let's go on. Maps for those who care. Now, let's look at this right here. This is dated, brothers and sisters, to the 16th and 1700s, right? And it says what? Oceanus Ethiopiacus, which means what? Essentially the Ethiopian Sea. So when they actually made a salient point in a video called that Tariq Nasheed did, I actually forgot the video that he did, but in it he stated that the Atlantic Ocean was at one time called the Ethiopian Sea, and that's actually what we're looking at right here. All right. Why did I point this out? Ethiopicus, Ethiopia. Why do I point this out, brothers and sisters? Let's go, brothers and sisters, to the slide earlier. All right? Sometimes I do this for edification purposes, right? As a result of the sugar factories, there were so many Negroes in the island of Hispaniola that it resembles Ethiopia itself. This was said by a guy named Gonzalo Oviedo in the 16th century. All right. This source that I stated right here, other matters regarding slavery and a black man, I want to read this again. As a result of the sugar factories, there are so many Negroes in the island of Hispaniola that it resembles Ethiopia itself. That comes from a book written by Eric Williams entitled Documents of West Indian History. Not saying that any man is right in everything that he says, but are they who deny the slave trade going west willing to challenge, may he rest in peace, the scholarship of Sir Eric Williams, who was a prime minister and who died back in 1981? And one lady from Tobago told me that when he did pass away, the West Indies, certainly in her town, it was like a gloomy spirit, like they lost a very great one, you know? And he wanted the West Indies to be all united. The people who are saying that the slave trade never went west, what are they saying about our people's unity? Or are they just trying to promote not getting taxed by the white man, as opposed to saying we should just leave his system and go east altogether? Because eventually the Most High himself said that all nations will go back to their own land. So let's go into this next part. Next part. Map for those who care, part 4. All right. Ocean Ethiopian. If you're looking at this very carefully. Now, this is a map of Africa. Now, when you go into this particular thing right here, right? Sorry, I don't have the arrow to show in this particular regard. You see where the southern part of it is at? And then you see the term Ethiopia within the confines of the yellow or brownish highlighting. That whole area there was at one time called Ethiopia. So when they call it the Ethiopian Sea, that's for edification purposes. So the island of Hispaniola is said by the Europeans there, due to the sugar factories, that the people in Hispaniola look as if they came or are from Ethiopia itself. The same thing said of the Israelites. Israelites were said to look like Ethiopian. But I wanted to point out that the guy said, due to the sugar factories, the people that was brought there to deal with the sugar in the islands were people taken out of Western Africa. Let's go on. Negro land, 1736 map. You see right here where it says Negro land, and then south of it says Guinea. This is where many of the people were taken from and then shipped over as captives to the Western Hemisphere. So this is something we want to point out for reason and purposes. Negro land map, yet again. Next slide. Now, brothers and sisters, before we continue in this particular regard, citing our sources, our references, I want to sit there and state, and I say this in humility, giving honor and praise unto the Most High, This particular part right here slays the competition. Sources out, I don't like the terminology, out the gazoo. You understand? This is so documented, and I'm thankful to the Father for it, to have the patience and the time, and to the people who actually assisted to say, put this part there and talk about this at this point, because I didn't just make this and then just present it out to the people. It says in a multitude of counselors, there's safety. So this is why I did such a thing. All right. The matter was Royal African Company. The Royal Africa Company was founded in 1672. They wanted to import gold, ivory, dyewood, hides, and wax. And they were more so interested in slaves. It was given a license for trade, lasting for years, trading gold to England and blacks as slaves to America. James, Duke of York, we spoke of him earlier, was a shareholder in such. He was the governor of New York. The Royal Africa Company had some strong support from the following people: Charles Davenant, who stated the Royal Africa Company was responsible for training an indefinite number on the African trade. The political and commercial works, Charles Davenant. When you look this up, brothers and sisters, this is a person who spoke about the slave trade himself in his diaries, in his essays that date back before the 1800s, brothers and sisters. These are things that we're talking about. You can look up Royal Africa Company. You can look up the name Charles Davenant, and you can sit there and begin to see why we're saying what we're saying. Next slide. The matter with the Royal Africa Company, part 2. In the 17th century, that's the 1600s, more than half of the income in the Royal Africa Company derived from sale of slaves. 24,000 from the land of Liberia, 14,000 from the Gold Coast, 10,000 from Angola and Senegambia each, 6,000 from Benin. They were mostly taken to Barbados, Jamaica, Nevis, and the rest sold to the Spaniards or the or the English North Americans. All right. It says concerning the Royal Africa Company in the 1700s, right? In the 17th century, which is the 1600s. All right. The people who were taken as captives were mostly taken to Barbados, Jamaica, Nevis, and the rest sold to the Spaniards or to English North Americans. This is what we want to point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. Many blacks as captives were brought to what is now Manhattan from Madagascar. The number may never be known. They were brought by pirates. Brothers and sisters, a lot of people say the spirit that you see in Jamaica for some of the stuff, like maybe some of the crimes or violence, is because an elder from Jamaica told me this, that Jamaica used to be ran by pirates. You understand? And that some of the black people, they adopted the spirit of that, like that wild kind of spirit, you might say. You understand? So getting back into this particular aspect, brothers and sisters, when it says many blacks as captives were brought to what is now Manhattan from Madagascar. Who's to deny that the pirates were trading people off as slaves? You're a pirate. Why wouldn't you do it? What law code of the pirates would stop them from doing it? The matter of the Royal Africa Company, part 3. A gentleman named Frederick Phillips had blacks as slaves in what is now Yonkers, New York in the 1680s and prospered in the 1690s. The Royal Africa Company traded over 15,000 blacks as slaves in the 17th century. George Watson of the Bank of Scotland with Michael Kincaid and James Fawkes of the London-based Scottish firm all had a hand in the Royal Africa Company and the trading of blacks as slaves. All right. So what are we talking about in this particular case right here? George Watson College is right here in Scotland that you see there on the right-hand side. Brothers and sisters, that college was started by the trade of people as slaves. That's how they got the money to help start that. So we already went over Brown Brothers Harriman and what happened in New York. And now we're talking about European places that was actually made to be successful due to the slave trade. All right? So let's go on, if we will, to the next part. An aspect of the Middle Passage. Along with their human cargoes, crowded, filthy, undernourished, and terrified out of the wish to live, the ships also carried an invisible cargo of microbes, bacilli, spirochetes, viruses, and intestinal worms from one continent to the other. Europe brought smallpox, measles, gonorrhea, syphilis. The Africans brought yellow fever, dengue, said by some, malaria, yaws, and leprosy. So this is something we just want to point out for edification purposes concerning this kind of matter right here. All right, an aspect of the Middle Passage. Next slide. An aspect of the Middle Passage, part 2. Smallpox was feared more than other diseases. Captain Wilson of the ship Britain lost more than half of 375 blacks as slaves to smallpox. On the Nightingale, which was a slave ship, on his second voyage, about 150 blacks as slaves died chiefly to fevers and flux. Out of 250, only 100 lived. So let's look at this. Smallpox was a disease that can kill you. Now, this is a picture on the right-hand side that was painted by the abolitionists. The abolitionists, you may say, were two-faced in certain cases, but the point in showing their picture the picture that they made, did the abolitionists have any reference to say that there were no slave ships? Or was the abolitionist hated by the enslaver because they were standing in the way to try to get Parliament and then also Congress to sit there and say, get rid of slavery and the slave trade altogether? Brothers and sisters, there would have been no movement called the abolitionists if there were no people that they were not trying to abolish. So let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. Slavery and the abolishment of such. In the British West Indies, slavery was made illegal in 1834, even though it stated that it didn't end to 1838. In the United States, slavery was made illegal in 1865. In the French West Indies, slavery ended in 1804 until 1814, when Napoleon Bonaparte reinstituted slavery for the French-controlled place. It was abolished in 1848 eventually. In Brazil, slavery was abolished in 1888. Mississippi did not abolish slavery until 2013. Drops mic. Did you know that, brothers and sisters and elders included? Mississippi did not abolish slavery legally until the year 2013. Brothers and sisters, I got Facebook posts that go back to 2010. You understand? 2013. My daughter was born in 2006. So looking at it in this particular aspect, we have to begin looking, see, hold on. Mississippi did not turn in her papers to be listed as a place where slavery is to be made illegal until 2013. So much for the idea that slavery didn't happen, because we're talking at this point legal documentation. Let's go on. The presidents and slavery. George Washington had 317. Thomas Jefferson, 600 or more. James Madison, 100 or more. James Monroe, 75. Andrew Jackson, 200. Martin Van Buren, 1. William Harrison, 11. John Tyler, 70. James Polk, 25. Zachary Taylor, 150. Andrew Jackson, 8. Ulysses Grant, 5. Brothers and sisters, these are 12 presidents of the United States that either during their presidency or prior to their presidency were slaveholders. Let's look at some of them. Washington, first president. Madison. There is, brothers and sisters, a school named after him in New York. Andrew Jackson. There is a school, brothers and sisters, named after him in New York. I want to state, brothers and sisters, that when you look at the right-hand side, Andrew Jackson there should be Andrew Johnson. All right? That was just a typo on my end. Andrew Jackson having 200, Andrew Johnson having 8. All right? So just want that to be noted for edification purposes. And Ulysses Grant is the guy that's on the American currency, as well as Andrew Jackson, as well as George Washington. And I'm going to go there and say that Lincoln had slaves because his wife, Mary, had slaves, and a man and his wife were one. So what she has, you have George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. All right? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. James Madison, James Monroe. Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren. William Harrison, John Tyler. James Polk, Zachary Taylor. Andrew Johnson, Ulysses Grant. Let's go on. Queen Isabella of Spain, 19th century. This is the queen who ruled Spain when the situation with the Amistad occurred. She wanted to have the Africans put back into slavery and to have them never freed. All right? This is Queen Isabella of Spain, a woman that was heavily involved within the slave trade. All right? This is Queen Elizabeth I. She was the queen who supported John Hawkins in the moves he made in the 16th century. All right? Somebody asked, Mississippi abolished slavery in 1913. Did I hear that correctly? No, you didn't hear that correctly. It was 2013. The state of Mississippi did not make slavery illegal until the year 2013. Not 1913, but 2013. And this is now the year 2018. Next slide. Havana slave list dated to the 18th century. All right? Who you looking at there, brothers and sisters, is Charles IV, the King of Spain. This is a list of slaves documented in Havana, which is Cuba. You can look this up, and this is dated to 1791. The King of Spain at that time, brothers and sisters, was a guy named Charles IV. Let's go on, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. Spanish slave ship recovered. This is said by archaeologists to be the remains of a shipwreck in 1841. It was an illegal slave ship heading toward Cuba. It was called Trovador or Trovadore. So I just want that to be noted and stated there for edification purposes. All right. Next slide. Slave houses in Louisiana. What you're looking at there on the left-hand side is part of it still standing to this day, and part of it on the right-hand side still standing to this day. All right. So this is something we want to point out, brothers and sisters, for, as stated, for edification purposes. Next slide. Delphine Lelore of Louisiana, 19th century. In 1834, her home was found with over 5 tortured people, and this was confirmed by a judge named Jean-Francois Canon. Now, I may be pronouncing the name wrong. If such is the case, I apologize. She escaped to France and eventually died at the age of 62. So Louisiana, as we stated earlier, all right, was operated by the French for a great length of time. All right. In the 19th century, which is the 1800s, that's saying 1834, you had it to where, brothers and sisters, this woman's house was raided and found to have all kinds of people being tortured and have their limbs cut off and sewn to other parts of their body, and so forth and so on. All right? Let's go on. Oh, somebody said, Torah, that's even worse. It even gets worse than that. We didn't finish this PowerPoint yet. We're going to show how worse it got. Slave houses in Georgia, Bostwick. General Tecumseh Sherman of the Union Army took over Atlanta in September of 1864. He is the one who made the famous 40 acres and a mule to the slaves, which we know did not happen. All right. Next slide. The paperwork in a book regarding the slave trade. Negroes for Sale by John and Thomas Manfon. The cargo of the ship Venus, Captain Buncombe. Conflating, of 280 prime slaves, mostly men from the Gold Coast. The sale will be open in a few days upon very generous terms. Brothers and sisters, let's see that it says from the Gold Coast. And let's see what Gold Coast this was. All right? See? Gold Coast. Right here. The Gold Coast colony. So now, you see that, brothers and sisters? Gold Coast. And according to this, which was an advertisement for a slave auction, we see what? Mostly men, because I can't make that other word out, from the Gold Coast. Mostly stout, perhaps mostly, right, because F used to be S back in Old English. Mostly stout men from the Gold Coast, and we already shown where that Gold Coast is at. The sale will be open in a few days upon very generous terms. In a book that I speak on in the slave trade, you can get this book online, all right? It's called Deuteronomy 28:15-68, The Condition of the Blacks, all right? So that book, the information that we see in this PowerPoint is not to be haughty, nowhere in comparison to the information that's contained in that book. This is just a PowerPoint, so in the book, it goes in much more in depth. And that book, you can get online on Amazon, okay? Let's go on to the next slide. Aaron Lopez in A Tale of Slavery in the West, all right? Let's go on, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes concerning this matter.
Have you ever wondered what it was like to be a slave? Have you ever wondered what it was like to be a slave in North Carolina?
The degradation, the wrongs, the vices that grow out of slavery are more than I can describe. They're greater than you would willingly believe. Everywhere the years bring to all enough of sin and sorrow. But in slavery, the very dawn of life is darkened by these shadows.
Harriet Jacobs was born a slave in Edenton, North Carolina. Though she was born in bondage, she describes her childhood as happy until both her mother and mistress died, and she was sold to a family member of her mistress. After that, her experience with slavery was very different. She was eventually able to escape and went on to write a book. It's through slave narratives such as hers that we're able to get first-hand accounts of what life was like for those Americans who were enslaved. Another resource are the volumes of interviews of former slaves housed at the Library of Congress. Both of these sources give us a fuller picture of slave life in my own home state of North Carolina. Around 1800, there were about 140,000 Black people living in North Carolina, which was a little less than a third of the population. A few of these were free Blacks who mostly farmed or worked in skilled trades, but the majority were slaves. Most slaves in North Carolina did not live on a large plantation, but rather on small to medium-sized farms. 53% of slave owners in the state owned 5 slaves or less, and only 2.6% of slaves lived on farms with over 50 other slaves during this time period. By 1850, only 91 slave owners in the entire state owned over 100 slaves. Though the plantations may not have been as large as those in the deeper South, that did not mean the work was any easier for them. On average, field slaves in North Carolina, just as elsewhere in the country, worked sunrise to sunset, 5.5 to 6 days a week, usually, though not always, allowed Sunday off. No, I never know what it was like to rest. I just work all the time from morning till late at night. I had to do everything they want to do on the outside. Work in the field, chop wood, hoe corn, till sometime I feel like my back shoulder break.
Brothers and sisters, that was an account, and it showed the names of the people. For those who are interested, you can look that up. And I happen to have that book, Narrative of Life of a Slave Girl. I actually happen to have that book. But brothers and sisters, this is something we want to show in regards for edification purposes. Sources, documentations, references, and then your friend right here, Aaron Lopez, right? He was a Jewish guy that was involved in the slave trade. So when they try to sit there and talk about other people being oppressed, you still don't want me to talk about the impression that I wanted to talk about. Essentially, that means you want to control the conversation, and it don't go down like that. So the reason why I picked that particular video right there that you saw and heard in part, all right, was because of the fact that it spoke about North Carolina. North Carolina, all right, we discussed earlier, brothers and sisters, got many of their captives from Virginia, as we discussed earlier. Many of the people that were captives in Virginia were brought there by the Dutch when they was captured by the Portuguese. Many of the people that were captives from the Portuguese, later on captured by the Dutch, came from Angola. According to Rudolph Windsor in his book, many of the people that was taken as captives from Angola go all the way back to the 12 tribes of Israel. So let's go on to the next slide, if we will, for edification purposes. Just getting warmed up. Let's go. All right. The fugitive slave law passed in 1850 allowed whites to recapture blacks and sell them back into slavery in the South. Many blacks in Boston were put on alarm concerning this, and many blacks migrated to Canada. This was an actual flyer that went out saying what? Caution, colored people of Boston, one and all. Watchmen and police officers of Boston, kidnappers and slave catchers. Keep a sharp lookout for kidnappers and have top eye open. Dated to April 1851. All right? So, looking at this particular aspect right here, right? When it says caution colored people of Boston, kidnappers and slave catchers. In the 1850s, as we went over earlier, the people were allowed to go and capture people that were freed and sell them back into slavery. Let's go on to the next slide. As we stated, just getting warmed up. All right, let's go. Shadrach Minkes, let's go. Shadrach was born in slavery in 1814 and died in 1875. May he rest in peace. In 1850, he escaped slavery and went to Boston, then eventually to Canada. So I put this right here as one of the sources concerning that particular aspect. Who is it? Anthony Johnson, of Hayden Lewis. Let's go. Brothers and sisters. The first slave owner in America was not only a black man, he went to court and demanded it. In 1654, it was time for Anthony to release John Casar, a black indentured servant. Instead, Anthony told Casar he was extending his time. Casar left and became employed by the free white man Robert Parker. Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker in the Northampton court in 1654. In 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Casar indefinitely. The court gave judicial sanction for blacks to own a slave of their own race. Thus, Casar became the first permanent slave and Johnson the first slave master. See, the reason why I went into this particular thing called a meme, we're going to break this meme down again. This has been done before, but we want to do this again. First off, this man that you're showing in the picture, is this Anthony Johnson or is this Hayden Lewis? I want to ask that for edification purposes. All right, where it says of, supposed to say or. Who is it, Anthony Johnson or Hayden Lewis? Let's go. Looking at this right here, this is a famous meme that went around. And they start talking, brothers and sisters, in regards to saying Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker. How did Anthony Johnson, a black man, get the name Johnson? Question one. Then it says in 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Casar indefinitely. The court gave judicial sanction for blacks to own a slave of their own race. So apparently, we need to sit back and look at this. Anthony Johnson is said in this meme that you see here on the left, this is all over YouTube, all over the internet. People have actually come to me who are black people saying, oh, you're talking about the slave trade and this and that. Look, there was a black guy doing it. But we have to ask, is this truly Anthony Johnson that is in the picture? Or did they just take a picture of some Negro and just throw it up there? Reason being is because if Anthony Johnson, according to a book entitled Slavery in the Making of America by Houghton and Houghton, Anthony Johnson died. He was no longer alive after 1670. He died in the year 1670. So if he died in 1670, how did you get this picture of him? Question was never answered. But when you want to sit there and don't want a black man to talk about black history, black culture, black origin, and so forth, you're going to try to sugarcoat it, you know? Because I'm going to say this, and I say this in no disrespect. You can't love the oppressor and the oppressed. All right? So let's understand that. Anthony Johnson, the pioneer of American slavery. And then it says what? Thus Casar became the first permanent slave, and John the first slave, and Johnson the first slave owner. This is dated even in this to the 1650s. So you may want to look up, remembering that, John Punch. Because John Punch dates back being a permanent slave in the year 1640. See, they really think, and I say this in no disrespect, they think niggas don't read. And that's how they call you. When they want to sit there and pacify somebody else, the Irish, they were kids, the Chinese, do they tell other people to stop, quote unquote, whining? Oh, they got over it. So should you. If a Chinese man want to talk about the oppression with them in Japan, I can't tell him today he shouldn't worry about it. It's not my place. And just the same, it's not your place to tell a person of color, so-called black person, that we should not talk about when we want to talk about history. That's why there's people called historians. There are some people who do this for a living. You don't tell the person to not do so. You understand? Next slide. John C. Calhoun in Beaufort, South Carolina. John C. Calhoun spoke of the South having to preserve the institution of slavery. He worked in the Senate of the United States in the era of Andrew Jackson. John C. Calhoun of the South spoke, saying you need to preserve the institution of slavery, as you see being shown over there on the right-hand side. So you may want to look up John C. Calhoun and see what it is. American Colonization Society and William Lord Garrison. I told you we just getting warmed up. An organization that emerged in the 19th century and in time shipped black people from America to Liberia in the 19th century. William Lord Garrison was an abolitionist who started in 1831 the newspaper called The Liberator. Garrison was at one time imprisoned for saying that Francis Todd was involved in the domestic slave trade. All right? You may want to look these names up. It says William Lord Garrison. He was an abolitionist. As stated, the abolitionists would not have existed if they didn't have a thing that they wanted to abolish. Okay, so let's go on. The matter with Dred Scott. The Dred Scott case in 1857 was based on the fact that he lived in a free state for a certain amount of time and stated when he went to a slave state that he was free. Judge Taney of the United States Supreme Court stated that the Negro has no right to have a case in a federal court, and essentially that the white man doesn't have to obey anything in regards to the black man. So those talking about we can go and get a sovereignty, remember what Judge Taney said. They don't have to respect nothing about you. They never loved you. They never will. And to be quite candid, the Most High, sending Israel in captivity, he said, they who hate you shall rule over you. So there's no man to save you. The only one to save us is the Most High. Let's go on. Back to New York, this time with the Civil War. The ships would rot at her docks. Grass would grow in Wall Street and Broadway. And the glory of New York, like that of Babylon and Rome, would be numbered with the things of the past. That is stated from somebody named Ellis, Epic of New York, which was a paper back in the 1800s. Plantation slavery was big business. New York was like the corporate headquarters, and the entire plantation south was like the factory floor. This is from a book entitled The Hidden History of New York by Tinga Apita. So you may want to look that book up online. The Hidden History of New York. All right. Plantation slavery was big business. New York was like the corporate headquarters, and the entire plantation south was like the factory floor. Let's go on. New York, New Jersey, South Carolina. New York and New Jersey imported 4,551 slaves over the period from 1715 to 1767, less than 1,000 of whom were born in Africa. The rest were West Indians, and even the African-born may have lived for a time in the colonies. South Carolina was a direct importer from Africa. Documents from Donnan stated that the slaves were advertised as new Negroes, including some re-exported from the West Indies. Many in the Chesapeake were re-exports from the West Indies. Brothers and sisters, this coming from sources to be cited, such as the book that we cited earlier, The Hidden History of New York. All right, and I'm going to show where I got my sources from as the presentation goes on. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. Documented matter, December 22nd, 1785. About 6 a.m. an aqua landing with fine morning. So we have Essen go down for Hughes. I did send 2 canoe for 1,500 yams for 150 copper to pay Captain Hughes. His sole Captain William, go down Captain William, carry 169 slave. Captain Hughes carry 480 slave. Now, it may not sound like proper English, but I wanted to cite exactly what the document stated. And this is excerpts, all right, from Stephen Barrett, A.J.H. Latham, and David Northup, entitled The Diary of Antero Duke, an 18th century African slave trader. So you can look this up. This is the citation excerpt and where the information came from concerning this right here. And it spoke about 169 slaves. Let's go on. Selected bibliography. Let's go. The Slave Trade, written by Hugh Thomas. Black Cargoes, written by William Cowley. The Life of Oluda Equiano. Atlas of the Atlantic Slave Trade, written by David Eltis and David Richardson. 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. The African Slave Trade by Philip Curtin. African Voices of the Atlantic Slave Trade by Ann Bailey. History of Slavery by Suzanne Everett. The Oxford History of Slavery in the Americas. Brothers and sisters, that's from a selected bibliography, and where I got many of the sources that I cited in this particular aspect. Next slide. Deuteronomy 28 in the yoke of iron. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemy, whom Yah will send against thee in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he hath destroyed thee. This right here is a replica of the yoke of iron put upon our neck. Now, what you see is the mask there, that was done in the West Indies, right? They put that mask there so you can't eat the fruit that you grew and use the products that you grew during the slave trade. So that way the slave master can sit there and get the utmost profit and not have the slaves eat the stuff. All right. So this is something we just want to sit there and show. This is what our ancestors went through. So don't tell me about the Irish and how I should forget about it, because you're not going to tell the Irish that they shouldn't sit there and think about the black man's oppression. Next slide. Slave burial ground in New York. We went over this earlier. A skeleton in that particular aspect. And this is actually it right here in downtown Manhattan. Slave burial ground, also called African burial ground. They had a documentary that got into this particular subject, brothers and sisters. That ends the presentation. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. Shalom.